Good mythical afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Ayala live with another vlog for you. This is War in the Pacific, World War II. As always, please make sure you're writing your notes. And this time, giving you a little bit of help by not making you put any comments in the doobly-doo, whatever that may be this year. So please make sure you're writing your notes, because there may end up being a quiz or something after this at school. Maybe. That's a hint. Anyway, so to start off, we need to look at our objectives, or the things that we must be able to understand by the end of this small PowerPoint or vlog. So why did the U.S. join the war? Why does Japan want to attack the U.S.? What areas do or does Japan control prior to the Allied counterattacks? What battle turned the tide in the Pacific theater? And what is this idea of island hopping? So the first thing we're going to look at is the attack on Pearl Harbor. So why does Japan want... So the first thing, what does Japan want? Well, it wants the European colonies in Southeast Asia because it wants their natural resources. Because if you remember when we reviewed Japan, the majority of Japan's land is mountainous. And it's very difficult to get lots of resources out of that area. So the U.S. is concerned about this because of how close Japan would be to its own colonies in the Philippines and Guam. So what ends up happening, first the U.S. gives China some arms and weapons to fight against the Japanese, but that ends up not being very successful. So the second step in 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt decides that he's going to stop oil shipments to Japan. And what this does, this puts Japan stuck in between a rock and a hard place. So first of all, Japan now must either stop fighting and go into conflict with the U.S., so, let me restart that. Japan now must either stop fighting or go into conflict with the U.S. And what does Japan choose? Japan chooses to attack the U.S. by staging a sneak attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7th of 1941. And as FDR states, this will be a day that lays in infamy. And why does Japan attack there? It's because that's where the majority of the United States Pacific Fleet is housed, except for the carriers, which were out at sea during that time. So most of the fleet was destroyed, and Congress would declare war within the day on Japan and its Axis allies. So you have the Axis powers, Italy, Japan, and Germany, versus the Allied powers of whatever's left of France, Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. So Japan promptly starts invading all these areas in the Pacific. Guam, Wake Island, and the Philippines all falls in early 1942. Also in 1942, Japan takes the British colonies of Hong Kong, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and Burma and French Indochina. So within a year and a half, Japan controls over 1 million miles of Asian land. So when you look at this map over here, we have Japan right here, just the home islands. Then by the end of 1942, they owned all of this land that's outlined in red. So they control a lot of land. So what ends up happening is with all this land, Japan has all these prisoners of war. And what we've got to look a little bit at Japan's culture of Bushido. And under Bushido, surrendering is dishonorable. So they thought that's their culture, so they expected everyone else to feel the same. So what they did with some of these prisoners, including like at the Bataan Death March, was to march these prisoners of war up and down these islands and these areas of Japanese control, and more or less just waiting them till they died. Some, especially the Chinese, were experimented on. For you to look that up, look at Unit 731, because I'm really not going to go much further than just telling you it was there. The Allies decide to strike back. So in 1942, the U.S. wants to raid the Japanese home islands to make a point in saying, hey, we're going to get you too. So the U.S. sends B-25 bombers off of an aircraft carrier to bomb Tokyo. This will be known as Doolittles Raid. And what this does, this raises the Allied morale, and it actually shows that Japan can be attacked, and also decreases Japanese morale, because they're like, look, someone can actually fight us here at home. From there, May of 1942, we get the Battle of Coral Sea. This was an air battle only. No ships actually shot at each other. So all these aircraft took off from the battle groups, and they actually fought in the air over the ocean. And what this does, the Allies end up winning this, and this protected Australia from invasion or from being even, attacked by Japan more often. Then we get the Battle of Midway, which is the turning point of the war in the Pacific. And this occurred June 7th of 1942. And what Japan wants to do is attack an airstrip that the U.S. owns in that area. And Japan attacks it. But the U.S. waits until the Japanese aircraft are in the air. And while they're attacking Midway, the United States is hiding behind the horizon. So then, as soon as all their aircraft is in the air for the Japanese, the U.S. decides to attack the battleships and the carriers that those aircraft were protecting those aircraft. So what happens is the Allies end up winning because they destroyed that fleet. And also, think of all those pilots that now have no place to land, who are also forced to lose and ditch in the Pacific Ocean. Then the Allied offensive under Douglas MacArthur, who's a U.S. general, comes up with this strategic plan known as island hopping. And what this plan is that the Allies will go around these highly defended areas in the Pacific and capture all the islands around it to cut off supplies and to slowly but surely get closer to Japan. So they win two ways this way. They get closer to the home islands so they can attack the Japanese at home. And they cut off these defensive areas from being able to trade and get supplies that they need. So slowly but surely they start dying because they can't get the information or ammunition or food or anything that they need. From there, August 7th of 1942 to February of 1943 is called the Battle of Guadalcanal. It was a 6-month battle. And really what this was part of the island hopping strategy. That Japan wants to build a stronghold, and the Allies attack it to prevent this. This was known as the Allies as just straight up hell, while for the Japanese it ends up known as the Island of Death. And when we look at Japanese loss of 24,000 out of 36,000 troops, it kind of makes sense to call it the Island of Death. And from here, that's the end of this PowerPoint. We will continue the war in the Pacific in class. And as always, don't forget to be awesome.